Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL. And as always, with me on the other side of the line is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And also the host, one of the hosts of the NFL, the original Draft Breakdown podcast. It finally happened. It looked so bad for a half, and then it was so amazing. The Cardinals finally got on the winning side of things, and what a wild game. Seth, we're going to talk about this, but let's actually just go ahead and kick it off with this. Have you ever seen anything like that with the Cardinals? Where does that rally rank? The Cardinals were 20-0. They were down 20-0 at halftime, making it so they were down 43-7, outscored in the first half. Their first two games down 20-0 in the first half, and then they rally in a hurry. They score 16 fourth quarter points. They needed 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions, and they did both things. The last one coming as time expired in regulation to force overtime, and then they end it on a fumble recovery for a touchdown by Byron Murphy, a scoop and score, 59 yards. I have a hard time trying to think of another time when the Cardinals had such a turnaround. Have you ever seen the Cardinals in a game like that before for the Cardinals?
Not off the top of my head, and it's interesting because during the morning games with all the comebacks that were, marvelously going on, in our group text, our buddy Blake Murphy actually said, like, it's really just Detroit that the opener where we saw Kyler kind of lead this team back, and it was a tie, and so to then manifest it into reality after, like you said, 6 fairly, and not Kyler personally, but 6 fairly mundane, poor quarters of football, and I like poor is a strong word. It almost was like lethargic, like they were sleepwalking, and that in and of itself, then created this idea that they're just not a good team. And obviously it's one game, and we just are still enjoying the high of the comeback, right? Like we're still enjoying it, but I can't imagine a bad team is able to do what they did in the last, probably 26 minutes of football that they played, where they looked, think about it, really the only offense the Raiders got in the second half was a 47-yard interference. Yeah, like they didn't really do anything in the second half, and the offensively were dynamic. And I was blown away by this. Cardinals had 20 more offensive snaps than the Raiders.
It was
like that. Isn't that baffling considering what happened in the first half?
Yeah, that's the thing. So I think back to, comebacks like that. This was, Mark Dalton had it. It was the biggest comeback that a team had made for the Cardinals since 1999. I'll be honest, I don't remember that game in 1999. But the stakes were so at this point. Maybe it was simply because the stakes were so high, because this is a team that we all have hoped and expected to be better this year. That would be, that even with the adversity they faced in the offseason, kind of the expectation is this team better be competitive. And they were completely non-competitive. and then suddenly became competitive. I try to think, in terms of how the games ended. We've seen a couple of the Packers playoff games. When the last year's Green Bay game, honestly, was that way because the Cardinals were down and had to come back. Only it ended badly because of the end zone interception. The Detroit game is a good example. Only it was that one seemed a little bit different because one, it was the Lions, and two, we didn't know what the Cardinals were capable or what Kyler was capable in the pros, and I think it was different in that sense because he was just winging it in his rookie year. He really didn't know what he was. He was really improvising a whole lot, and while there was a lot of improvising, it was simply he locked in and was willing the team to victory or to rally, and being on the field so much is kind of how Cliff Kingsbury's offensive strategy goes, is that they will wear you down and the Cardinals are a much better team if they can play from head, but if it's close and they get a little bit of rhythm, they know that defenses will tire because they have an offense that runs with pace, that runs with tempo, and a quarterback who's relentless and will keep trying.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't believe you don't remember the Cardinals' opening game of a 6-10 season, Jess, where they got down 21-0 in the first quarter against the Doug Peterson-led Philadelphia Eagles. But yeah, I mean, that's the
I'll
thing.
Also
is
say this: in 1999, that season I was a newlywed, so
had better things to do.
So I was still in college. I was a newlywed, and I'll be honest, I didn't jump back into the NFL and the Cardinals probably till about so it was Denny Green. It was when I started paying attention because it was after I kind of finished college, and because I was working full time, married, going to college full time, so football made very low on the list at times. So I don't remember 1999.
Yeah, and it's just interesting because and it's true they've never, this was their biggest comeback since that game, but you look at the subtle differences. One, Philadelphia, was a 5-11 team that year, so they were a bad football team. The year before that, they were 3-13, so it was Andy Reid's first year as their head coach. Now I know that the Raiders have Josh McDaniels in his first year as their head coach. However, they were a playoff team last year. Derek Carr's been a Pro Bowl quarterback. They have maybe the best wide receiver in the NFL in Devontae Adams. So when you look at it from that perspective, you're looking at, two slightly different things. The Cardinals comeback in 99 was a 3-quarter comeback over time, while the Cardinals comeback this week was, a quarter and a half against a playoff team. And it, it just shows, like you said, the ability that they have and what they have in this team. And, it's something you and I talked about last week, and I don't think it was going to make a difference who was healthy and who wasn't, but this offense is so predicated on rhythm.
Yeah, they need something. It's almost like they just need a touch of juice, and Greg Dortch gave them that 29-yard catch. That it's like suddenly they think, okay, we can play offense now. We know we got it now. They just need someone to make a play to get them going.
Well, and you had Justin Pugh back in the lineup, and he played extremely well. And it takes a lot of pressure off of Rodney Hudson when he's in the lineup, and then all of a sudden it changes the dynamic, because honestly their pass blocking is actually really good when Pugh's in the lineup. With the addition of Will Hernandez, they don't have a true weak link. Their worst pass protector is just Kelvin Beachum, and that's just an age thing at this point,
Yeah.
like over anything else. And so when you look at it from that perspective, and you look at all of that, I think it was about finding that rhythm, finally getting into that, and then you saw the result, and it was just, it was a much better result and outcome in the second half, obviously, as they finally started to click together.
Oh, and it wasn't just clicking. It was like a complete switch flip, because the first half of they had 86 total yards of offense, which might have been the same amount that they had in, maybe it was 88 yards of offense in that debut in 2019, but 86 total of offense in the first half. After the first half, they had 327 yards of offense in the second half and overtime. In just the second half, it was 284 yards of offense in 51 plays. They rushed for 96 yards in the second half. Murray had 188 yards and a touchdown pass in the second half. But like, you look at including overtime, they had 327 yards of offense, 224 passing yards, and Kyler. It was the Kyler Murray show. He had 224 passing yards. He had 28 rushing yards. He had a passing touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown. He threw a 2-point conversion and ran for another. It was, and then on defense as well, they allowed 66 yards after halftime. 66 yards of offense.
And that's what I said. It was literally a 40, because that doesn't include the penalty.
Right,
and so
right.
You throw the penalty in there. They had 113 yards of offense. Almost half, 45%, 40% of that came on a penalty.
One play. And that was after they rolled up 20 points and 258 yards in the first half alone. And here's the thing that was crazy. You know how many offensive plays they had after halftime? 18. 18 plays.
And that's the thing. So they had 49 offensive plays in the first half. And so it's just it's just an interesting change and flip of the script. And
it was
wow.
It was something to be seen. Granted, we saw several rallies. We saw several crazy rallies at the end of games. We saw the Dolphins come back from 21 points down. You saw Joe Flacco and the Jets rally in the last couple of minutes. You had the Falcons, furiously come back only to falter at the very, very end in very Atlanta style. But my goodness, and just the urgency. This team at 0-2, especially how they played in the first half of both games, it was panic button. I was close to hit the panic button because we're thinking, oh crap, they just gave the coach and the GM extensions, the quarterback an extension, and they're terrible. They're just terrible. And so it was, what are we going to do? And then you could look at you're 0-2, and then you're staring the Rams in the face, who've beaten you, 10 of the last 11 times you've met. They haven't won. They haven't beat the Rams in Arizona since I think 2014, and 0-3. It felt worse, and it's weird just how 1-1 to maybe going to 1-2 just feels so much different than 0-3.
Just it feels safer.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. And we knew the Cardinals had a crazy beginning of the schedule. Look, they had the Chiefs. They had 3 playoff teams in a row. And now that Eagles game is going to look in week 5 looks much more challenging than we initially thought it might be. But, if somehow they can get to 2-1, if they can get to 2-1 this week, somehow. But even just 1-2, if you look at the full 6 games, there's really no reason why they shouldn't be 3-3 when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, because Carolina and Seattle are games even
they should be able to win.
Certainly should be able to win those games, even if they don't even if they don't need to look like they did in the second half to be able to beat those teams. So that's but that was something else. It was wild. It was everything that you would want to see from the quarterback you just gave $1 gazillion to. But let's take a step back and talk about the bad stuff. So coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web. What went wrong for the first 6 quarters? What was it? Were they just bad, or is it something else? That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web, and we're looking at a Cardinals team that through the first 6 quarters looked like the worst team in the entire NFL. They looked horrible.
Is 61-21 really that bad?
They looked and that's the thing. It was on both sides of the ball, and for me,
it really was too. That's the craziest part. It was both sides.
But I think for me, what was the big problem is that they were offering zero resistance defensively. And if they were going to offer zero resistance defensively, then the offense had no shot, especially when they like to defer. Like, they were going to have to change philosophies, because get on offense, score a touchdown first. You have to score first or the game is over. And even though I think Kyler didn't play well in the first half against Las Vegas. Against Kansas City, I thought Kyler played it like he was the bright spot offensively. He did not look good in the first half against Las Vegas. But for me, the major concern was like, oh my gosh, how bad is this defense? Because there was like anyone and anything was gaining yards. They were offering zero resistance. It was just marching down the field. They were doing nothing. They were not getting to the quarterback. They weren't covering. They weren't tackling. It was just like, remember how this team was a top 5 defense for roughly the first half of last season, and now they look as bad as we've ever seen a Cardinals defense play.
Yeah, and they just looked like they didn't have any idea of what they were doing. And it was, it became an issue both defending the run and defending the pass. In the second game, it was a little more clear that they had something, that they had some juice, but it wasn't, great in the first half. But you look at it, they put themselves in a position to be successful. So like, let's just look at the first drive. They had a 3rd and 11. They had a 3rd and 1. They had a 2nd and 21, a 3rd and 12, and then a 3rd and 4. And yes, they were able to obviously score, and it took almost 10 minutes of game time. But you look at it, they were in a position to get off the field. Against the Chiefs, that didn't happen.
Oh, man, that was so bad.
At all. And so you look at it, and then the Raiders' second drive, and we won't go through all their drives, but their second drive, it started off closer to that Chiefs game. You didn't see any 3rd downs, none, until the 3rd and 5 when they got off the field and they were able to force an incompletion. But that was the thing. So like, all of a sudden, that first drive, you were like, okay, JJ's back. Gives them a little more juice. Obviously, he's not an every down player. You saw him rotated out a number of times, but it allows it allows your other defenders to be singled up. The problem, in the first half, after the first drive, became they reverted back to what was going wrong in the Chiefs game. The second drive, like I said, they didn't get a 3rd down until the 3rd and the 4th down. The third drive, the third drive, they got a 3rd and 10, and then they ran that little screen play to Amir Abdullah for 23 yards. So like, but that was the only 3rd down. Like their plays were 1st and 10, 2nd and 10, 1st and 10, 1st and 10, and then 2nd and 3rd and 10. So like that is what people don't understand, or what people don't get, is that like, if you're not getting into a position to even like have a chance to get your team off the field, you're having issues. And that's where, the script flip more than anything. You look at the next, the first series of the next half, it was 3 and out. It was literally, stop the run 1 yard. By the way, Zaven Collins, pass incomplete, Jace Whitaker, pass complete, short of the sticks, good tackle by Marco Wilson, and all of a sudden the Raiders have to punt. So then you're able to go down and score a touchdown, right? And all of a sudden you're like, okay, maybe 20-7, like probably not, like it's middle of 3rd quarter, probably nothing's going to happen, but at least you're seeing the positive. Like, yes, it shouldn't take a full half to start to see that positive, but you're seeing the positive. And so that's what the problem was, is like the first week, and outside of the first drive in the first half, they weren't getting themselves in position to get off the field. Now, getting off the field, putting yourself in a position and getting off the field are 2 different things, obviously. But we know that they don't have a great pass rush right now without JJ Watt. We know that.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to expect to be able to get off the field in 3rd down situations when you can't rush the passer. And so you felt in that first drive, you're like, okay, you can see that they can at least get a little pressure on Carr, make him uncomfortable, put themselves in a position. It was the drives after that where you're like, oh, so that was just a one-off thing where they forced, 3rd downs and things like that. Now all of a sudden it was easy again for the Raiders, and you're like, all right, this is a problem. And so
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it was a schematic thing or if it just started because they finally got to stop.
Well, maybe it was that, and part of it, they keep saying, is that they were just making mistakes, and we're gonna have to raise the question. And I know why they did it this year, is because last year they really didn't play anyone in the preseason, and it worked out. This year. And maybe it comes down to the fact, while that was good in theory, the fact that you had the same defensive, same Jordan Hicks was the guy with the green dot. And you knew that, so they could afford that. This year, you're changing who's relaying plays in, so it's not the same. While it's the same defense, and you've got players in the system, multiple, but you don't have everyone in the same role. Or, more importantly, you don't have the most important guy in the same role, and that maybe it's just the time on task, and they finally got it together. Had they played a few series on defense doing that, as opposed to, they had Jalen Thompson who was going to radio in plays, or they had Zaven in some plays, and they never really settled on who was going to relay plays in until the first week of practice, when they decided it would be Isaiah Simmons, and then they changed it to Zaven Collins. So maybe this ended up being as simple as they needed to get these reps in the preseason. But for whatever reason, because of the guys on offense that were injured, they wanted to be sure to, especially since they're so thin on defense, was to make sure that they had their defense intact, personnel-wise, rather than repped.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like you said, without getting a lot of reps in training camp and the preseason, this is just a group that, I mean, we talked about it last week. They got a bad matchup to start. Like it was a
buzzsaw.
It was right. It was
we mentioned this before. The Chiefs are unbeaten with Patrick Mahomes starting at quarterback in Week 1. We know what are they, 7-1? You said the stat last week. And that's even if you're including Alex Smith in there. With Andy Reid, they're 7-1 in season openers. they are nearly unbeatable when they have more than a week to prepare. And so that matchup was a disaster to begin with, and then the Cardinals were not executing. So they were making mistakes as opposed to just being outmatched. They were making mental mistakes, and like Vance Joseph said last week on Thursday, it came down to about 14 or 15 that were bad plays. But when you have 15 bad plays against a team that is as good as Kansas City, that means 40 points.
Right, and you're never going to – that's what I'm saying. Like, it was funny. I was talking to my buddy that's a Chiefs fan, and I didn't get to watch the Thursday night game. I had football practice, so, I saw it was a close game. The Chargers made it closer late, obviously, with the kind of garbage time touchdown to give them the cover, that backdoor cover. But when you look at it, he said the Chiefs played like a C+ game, and they still beat a team that a lot of people are like, oh, this is one of the best teams in the NFL. Like, the Chiefs played an A+ game against the Cardinals, and yes, the Cardinals are
they played an F game to their,
right.
That's how you end up with a 44-21 game that was not competitive at
right.
all.
And so, like, that's the big thing. And so we'll see what happens, but the Chiefs are just a great team. The Raiders are not a bad team. I wouldn't say they're a great team, but I think they're probably relatively similar to the Cardinals in their abilities and their flaws. And the Raiders played the Chiefs tough, and then they blew a lead late against the Cardinals. And so, now we'll see where that leaves the Cardinals moving forward.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, it's our Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about some individual players, namely the play of Kyler Murray and the role of Isaiah Simmons. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web. There was, Kyler. I thought he played a fantastic, honestly, from the quarterback position, I thought he played well in week one. Especially what we saw was how he responded. There was no frustration. His demeanor has really changed. And I know people want that to immediately, they want to immediately find any mistake and start talking about the study habits, this or that. But you have to note that Kyler, his body language has been better. He has a much more even-keeled approach. I don't know what kind of flipped the switch, whether it's he and honestly, I think what it is, and Cliff alluded to it, I think it was before the season started, Kyler had really experienced zero failure his entire athletic life. And then he accepted it as a rookie because he was still trying to figure out what the heck was going on in the NFL. So he accepted that. He got frustrated last year with how they ended, got on a roll, and so he was doing what that win, playing at a high level. And then things got difficult, and it frustrated him. But now it was the first real adversity that he's faced, and now he's changed because of it. And I think it was just a natural progression to see whether it is or whether he's making a more concerted effort to not get overly emotional on the field. Because no matter what happens, that's going to follow him, which is, Tom Brady went berserk. Tom Brady went absolutely bonkers against the Saints when you were talking about how he's behaving on the sideline when things weren't going well. And he's a competitor, and Kyler's the same way. But you see, he took over the game, and the question is, could we expect him to do that more? Is that a realistic thing? If that's what he's capable, should he try to do that from the get-go?
It's an interesting thing, and the way that the offense works best is obviously if he's able to spread out, the love in the game, and they're able to get multiple people involved. It was just one of those situations, it felt like this week, where they needed a spark, and that spark had to come from Kyler, and Greg Dortch had a big play. Darrell Williams had a big run. Benjamin had a big play. These guys, Marquise Brown had a massive play. Like, these guys all made big plays leading up to the big plays, and so it's almost like that's what they needed more than anything is somebody to spark.
And that's what happened over the second half of last season, is that they never got that. There was no one stepping up to do something on offense or defense, and sort of fell apart. And once they feed off, like the Cardinals, for whatever reason, they feed off that playmaking. So when the defense makes a great stop, the offense responds. When a player makes a big play, then suddenly the offense is in rhythm, and it gets that juice. But his composure, his patience was also on display, and everyone's seen the 21-second 2-point conversion. We've Kyler in times past sometimes tries to force things, and if you watch how he led that comeback, it was patiently, and a lot of that was in part, guess what? After the first half, where Max Crosby was just going bananas, that the pass protection was really good in the second half. And I think Cliff Kingsbury, he called some plays that had some tough protections. And again, what we know happens with Cliff, he trusts his players too much and says they can do it. And when you have a guy like Max Crosby, he blows it up. And so in the second half, Kyler had time to throw, so he could kind of run around, try to make things happen. Then that was in perfect display on the 2-point conversion, when he scrambles around. Then it's created enough space that, guess what? He can just run to the end zone because no one's going to catch him.
Yeah, and in the second half, I thought there was a couple things that we saw better. Obviously, I talked about it earlier, the pass protection, the sack, and did they credit Kelvin with giving up that sack? Do you know?
I don't know, but the one sack that they had, it looked like Kelvin was just completely on skates.
Well, and if you go back and look, I think they were in a double tight situation on that, and so Max was on they gave him that sack. Okay. Max was outside of that double tight situation, and realistically nobody chipped, and Kelvin just had no chance to ever get a hand on Max. And so for the rest of the game, DJ Humphries was dominant against Chandler. Literally dominant against Chandler Jones in pass protection. And I thought Kelvin did a nice enough job. Like, he wasn't great by any means, but I thought he did a good job. And then we saw the interior was much more sound. And like I said, there was a twofold problem last week. One, Chris Jones is great. So that's just a situation. But Rodney Hudson last week looked like a guy that was contemplating retirement all offseason. He just didn't look like he was in game shape.
And that is understandably so, because they were bringing him along slowly, because
right.
he hadn't done any offseason work, and then he had the knee injury on top of that, so it wasn't like he was easing back in. He just wasn't. He was rehabbing.
Yeah, and then the second thing was, and you never want to pick on a guy, but Sean Harlow was abysmal, and that's not Sean Harlow's fault. He's taken only snaps at center all training camp and all preseason, and then Cody Ford gets hurt, and then Justin Pugh's still hurt, so now it's and then Marquise Hayes got hurt, so all of a sudden it's well, we don't want to sign anybody else because we already traded, and they did sign Max Garcia, off the I don't think
Giants practice squad.
Yeah, but they weren't going to start Garcia week 1, and so
it looked like they were going. You're like, are they really going to put Max Garcia at left guard?
Yeah,
and sign him Saturday.
And realistically, it was a sacrificial lamb to a slaughter in that game for Sean Harlow, and I don't blame him, but that puts Rodney in a very precarious position because he's not the athlete he was 5 years ago. He's smart enough, he's great with the line calls, but if you're relying on basically a fourth string guard who's really a center to play left guard against one of the premier interior pass rushers in the game, you're going to have a long day. And so, the comeback this week for the offensive line I thought was impressive. I've been really impressed with Will Hernandez thus far. Like, he's just been kind of a bully at that right guard position. It's been good. And I don't know if you saw the clip of him decleating Max Crosby late, but like that was fun to see. And something that, like, they've missed without having, and that was, I mean, as much as J.R. Sweezy struggled at times, he brought that nastiness. They've been missing that, and so to have that back was good. There was just a lot of, I thought, positive things that came about after what was a incredibly negative first game and a less than stellar start to a second game.
The other player kind of we want to look at is Isaiah Simmons, who, for all intents and purposes, was benched. They gave him the play caller duty in week 1. He failed. Vance Joseph didn't really mince words by saying that Isaiah needed to play better. He needed to play with the right leverage. He needed to play with the right technique. Everything about the operation, that their defensive operation was abysmal. They couldn't get lined up. They couldn't get the play call in, so they weren't playing with the right leverage. They were making too many mistakes, and Simmons was kind of at the middle of that. And then they essentially bench him, but then comes back and makes that huge play, forcing the fumble in overtime. I will say this: you could tell that once you got to overtime, things were clenching up for Las Vegas. Because before the game-winning play, there were basically 3 turnover. That was the third turnover worthy play in a row. Because Zaven got beat, but then punched the ball out for the fumble, and Foster Moreau saved the Raiders at that point. Jalen Thompson drops an interception, and then Hunter Renfrow fumbles again, leading to the scoop and score by Byron Murphy. But Simmons got benched. Was given a smaller role, kind of like a rookie year type role. And then Cliff talked about how they communicated this with Simmons. They told him he was going to have a smaller role, and it worked. They said he really locked in. But my question to you is, could we have seen this happen? Like, what happened? Why is it that Simmons is getting benched when he's, like, the entire offense? They've been the whole entire offseason, they've been counting on him to be a playmaker.
It's an interesting thing, and the way Cliff's comments come off is that it's either a studying issue or a comprehension issue, because when he comments about he had his best week of practice last week and then he doesn't play, it makes you wonder if it's a preparation thing or if it's that he's almost, and you and I talked about this off the air, like if he's almost too overwhelmed. Like, there's too much responsibility. There's too much for him to be in control of, and he needs, he needs to be able to think less and just play more. And go ahead.
No, I was just, I feel, because he was talking about they were using the wrong leverage, things, this and that. I think he's still at the phase in his career where he knows that he's going to out-athlete people, and just hasn't been as locked in with the technique. Now, some guys have been able to get away with that, but at that position, you really can't get away with it. A cornerback in coverage with bad technique, if they've got great athleticism, can close and kind of erase the mistakes. You can't really do that when you're calling plays and you're playing the slot and you're playing off the ball and you're playing safety and you're playing off the edge.
Well, and you do wonder if it was also a combination of he was setting the defense last week, right? And so there was a lot of
right. And so, like, kind of a couple years ago, when Jordan Hicks is saying when it kind of looked like in 2020 that his play was declining, that he was making mistakes because he was spending too much time getting other guys set up.
Right. And so when you look at it from that perspective, you do wonder if that was part of the problem, is that he's either not getting the rest of the defense in the right position, and so they had to pull back and put somebody else there, or he is getting other guys in the right position, but then he's too late getting himself into position and then making sure that he's able to make plays, right?
Right. And it was the first time, because from what we saw in training camp in the preseason, is that we were anticipating like Jalen Thompson. Jalen Thompson said the plan was for him to relay plays in. Zaven did it in the little bit that he did in the preseason. Then they turn around and then it becomes Simmons' role. I will say this. When you looked at the snap count and then you realize that Zaven Collins was the guy who was relaying defensive play calls and the ones getting them lined up, and you look at how Zaven played and you're like, this is very promising, because last year, Zaven sometimes looked lost. And then last week, there were a couple plays he didn't look great, but the fact that he was able to be on the field every play, that they trusted him to do that, and then to be able to make some plays, because he did, while relaying calls in, you're looking at, this is kind of that first step in the right direction, that you feel like that maybe the Cardinals might have known what they were doing, that Collins was really him.
Well, and that's the thing is, it's one game, but it's been an improvement, like you said, slowly but surely, in each of the games. And so he was a little bit better against a great offense in game one, and then he was much better against a good offense in game two. And so you go, okay, this is trending in the right direction. That's all you can ask for.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you think that they're going to increase Simmons' role this week? That it was a 1 week thing, or are they going to try and slow roll him back to make sure that he stays locked in?
It'll be interesting, because I don't know if they know what they're going to do, because you and I were talking about this before. The second linebacker snaps were basically split up between
so Vigil got some, Vallejo got some, Neiman got some, Simmons got some, and even Zeke Turner got one, and he gave him a touchdown.
Yeah, and they even had Dennis Gardeck back there in like an off-ball situation. So it seems like they're playing a lot of 4-2 or 4-3 defenses at defensive fronts. And so if they're in that 4-2, who's the second linebacker? If they're in a 4-3, who are the second and third linebackers? And so in that case, I don't know, only because I don't know if they know how they're going to go forward on that. Like if they're going to stay in that 4-2-5, and because Jace played a lot in the game, and he played well, by the way. That was Chase Whitaker's best game I've ever seen him have. When you do that, you look at it and you go, okay, this makes sense, right? Like if it's going to be Isaiah, you would assume that he'll be in either the 4-2 or the 4-3, because he can come into the box in the 4-3, or he can be that extra guy in the secondary in the 4-2-5. But I just don't know, because they didn't do anything that made sense outside of Zaven played every snap, and then everything else was just a mixed bag. So you're like, I don't know if they know what they're doing quite yet. And it's just like you said, maybe it is a slow roll back into like, hey, we're going to give you snaps at linebacker right now, and then next week we're going to add snaps into playing a little more, some safety as well, or in the slot a little bit, something like that. we talked about this, man, with Simmons. Like, it took 3 years for him to kind of blossom at Clemson, and that's at college football. And I'm not trying to take anything away from college football. I talk about college football literally twice a week, but the NFL is such a jump, right? And so if it took him, until year 3 to become this All-American type of player, maybe it takes till midway through year 3, or even, God forbid, year 4 before he makes that leap into being a player that is great. And right now they just need him to have consistently good reps when he's given them.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about whether we think what team is the Cardinals at this point. So we've seen the bad, and we've seen some good as well. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. And let's talk about, so we've got now a Cardinals team that looked absolutely atrocious and then showed how kind of, maybe it's the ceiling, what we could kind of maybe hope to see offensively and defensively in that second half. So the question now becomes, which team are the Cardinals? Or maybe not which one. Are they a bad team that caught fire? Are they a good team that was just going through a funk? Or are they something in between that?
I think I still think that they're a playoff caliber team. I'm not going to say they're a playoff team, but like, I think they're a team that's going to be in the mix late in the season for a playoff position. And that's a 8, 9, 10 win type of team, and we'll see where they're at. That's what I see them as still, and I don't think that that's unreasonable or anything like that. I also want to see them, like I said, like, and the way the schedule has fallen is it definitely feeds into the idea that a lot of people had that they aren't good. But you look at it, the first 3 games played terribly to their weaknesses. You've got 3 teams that are great at throwing the ball and that have good pass rushes, right? So like, you're like, all right, well, that's tough for them. And they got a win out of one of those games so far. And so you're like, okay, that's how I look at it. Like, I knew that the start of the season wasn't going to be easy, and maybe I'm delusional and I thought, hey, 2-2 is realistic, and now it is. And so
Right.
When you look at it from that perspective and you say, yeah, it's going to be a tough one this weekend, we'll talk about it later, but it's going to be tough. That's okay, because in reality, and not that any game's easy, but they have a much more winnable game in week 4. And so if they're a good team may not beat LA this weekend, but a good team will at least put up a game that's competitive. If they're not a good team, then I think we'll see a similar performance to week 1 more than the second half of week 2. Like, that's what I would think if they're truly just not a good team, and that maybe Kyler took over and was able to will them to a victory more than they're a good team. But honestly, like, I've seen enough where I think that they've got a good chance to still be a good team.
And I think that too, but I if you all know, I am vastly optimistic when it comes to things like this. But I am going to say, I was beginning to believe that they're bad, but when they flipped the switch, then they gave us a look. I think that offensively, they can be that good. Defensively, I think that is the highest. Like, that's kind of the highest that they can do. So that's the ceiling, which means we know that they can't be that great. Like, they're not gonna give up 66 yards and a half on the norm. And so But I think there's something, as long as they've got the right personnel, and maybe it's as simple as J.J. Watt, because look at 8 games of J.J. Watt, they're 8-0. And defensively, they seem to look completely different outside of that first half. It's hard to believe, but his presence is that impactful. And if they have him on the field, then they are closer to what we saw Sunday in the second half than what they were for the first 6 quarters, is basically kind of what I come to, is that I don't think we're going to see them dominate in the same fashion that we've seen, but offensively, I think we've seen I think they're close to what that is, and that defensively, they can at least pull that out of their hats from time to time. And so maybe I got fooled for a little bit, but I still kind of think that they're a good team that underachieved, that wasn't ready, that just had things go poorly for them, and that moving forward they'll be better. Now, that said, do you think that performance was enough to get them rolling? Because it didn't, like their win against Buffalo in 2020 didn't have that same effect. In 2020, I think they did that, and they kind of felt themselves a little bit. How do you think they respond? Do you think that becomes a catapult or an anomaly?
It'll be interesting, because I don't know if it's a catapult to the sense of that it's an immediate thing, right? Like that he immediately becomes, or they immediately become the playoff team that we're expecting. Like I said, I'm not going to be shocked if they're, 3-3 heading into week 7 when DeAndre Hopkins gets back. And quite frankly, that would be fine as long as they're healthy at that point. That's when you want to see that kind of jump, because while it is only 11 games, it is going to be 11 important games and really could define the season. And we've seen that they can, like you said, get hot, catch lightning in a bottle, and rattle, go 8-3, 9-2 in that span. So what they need to do is be, like we said, a good team. And good in the NFL is a 500-ish team. And if they're a good team, then they set themselves up in that, latter third of the season, or 2/3 of the season, to be potentially more than just good.
Yeah. And which leads us to what we want to talk about next. So coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, episode of Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's wrap things up and talk about the Cardinals' Week 3 opponent, the Los Angeles Rams. What do we expect against them? Let's preview that game, make our predictions. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, and we got the Rams coming up. And so the Rams come to town. They are a team that is 1-1 after losing Week 1, and they got their fanny spanked by the Buffalo Bills. Then they also they allowed the Falcons to come back. They came up with a 31-27 win. And so you've got a Rams team that hasn't looked particularly good. They got their fannies beat in Week 1, and after building a big lead against a bad team, they almost gave it up and needed some magic happening at the end of that game, and they got a big end zone interception by Jalen Ramsey to kind of end the threat. But 31-27 win. Matthew Stafford has 5 turnovers in the first 2 weeks of the season. Definitely a concern for them. And their defense continues. While their defense has allowed a lot of points in the first 2 weeks, they also have forced 7 takeaways in that time. And so what we have is and plus the Cardinals have not beat the Rams at home since 2014, and they've lost 10 of the last 11 matchups.
Those are just numbers.
How do we look at this game? Because this Rams team, I will admit, like, while I believe they are the favorite and should be the favorite because they have, I mean, if you look at it, they have a star at quarterback, they have great receivers talent-wise, and they have a legitimate star at each level of the defense in Aaron Donald, Bobby Wagner, and Jalen Ramsey. And that secondary looks that they're very good. But at the same time, they do have question marks. They haven't got much from the running game. They have questions on the offensive line as Andrew Whitworth is retired. And Matthew Stafford had elbow issues over the course of the offseason and don't know how that's going to affect them. How do you see this team coming into Arizona, especially one that they know they own the Cardinals at home right now? So they can come in no matter how bad or not good they might have looked so far this season. They have that in their back pocket. They feel like this stadium is their stadium.
Yeah, and you look at it, I mean, the last couple games, they've, like you said, they didn't play well in the first game at all. And they got kind of run over by a buzzsaw similar to what the Cardinals did. And in that case, you look at it, I don't know. I mean, what do you make of one game in that sense? Like it's similar to, getting up in arms about the Cardinals game in week 1. And when you do it in that case, like we said, it's tough to look at it and say anything positive. But on the flip side, their offensive line has been bad. They've given up 8 sacks so far this season. I think their only offenseman that hasn't that's starting is Coleman Shelton. And meanwhile, like the other guys, like, David Edwards has allowed 2 sacks. Joseph Noteboom's allowed 3 sacks. Like Rob Haven's allowed a sack. They haven't been able to pass protect. And that goes into what you said about Stafford, is that we know in his career, when he's kept clean, he's a phenomenal quarterback. And you look at, 2021, he was sacked only 30 times. He's on pace right now to be sacked, I think, 68 times. My math might be off a little bit. Don't quote me, but about double of last season.
Yeah, and that for an older quarterback who needs protection to play well, and now you add on top of that a known elbow issue.
Right. Well, and you think about this too. He threw a ton of interceptions last year. The difference being that he threw so many passes last year that it kind of offset that he threw 17 interceptions. Now, again, this season, again, he's on pace for like 35 interceptions. He's not 35 interceptions, but he does have a propensity to be in 20 interception range, right? Like 17 to 20-ish. The more he's going to get hit, the more he's probably going to throw interceptions, because that's just how it works as a quarterback. Unfortunately, when you're taking, you tend to not, produce. The interesting thing, like you said, 261 total yards of offense given to the Falcons, only 171 passing yards, 90 rushing yards, and they forced 3 turnovers. They for the first game against the Bills, but the Bills are so good offensively that sometimes it just doesn't matter.
Right.
But that's the that's the question you have to ask. Stafford threw 2 interceptions, was sacked 1 time in the game against the Falcons. Meanwhile, the Falcons offense, isn't great. I know they're averaging a lot of points, but they've had, they've had different guys score different this year. It's not like it's been all of offensive touchdowns. And so when you look at it from that perspective, they gave the Falcons a chance because of their mistakes. Was that game at home or no? Yeah, it was in LA.
So yeah, they've played 2 home games already.
So, and they haven't played well at home, which is interesting. It's tough, man. Their defense is still great. Even though they're giving up 29 points per game, their defense is still great. It's the offense that I'm interested in because, it looked better last week, like we talked about, but they've got some issues going forward right now. Joseph Noteboom is been battling a knee injury. Brian Allen missed last week with a knee injury. And then Leonard Floyd didn't play last week with a knee injury, I believe. Correct.
Same with Van Jefferson as well. So they're
so some of their, in similar to the Cardinals, right? That some of their key players are going to either be hobbled and or missing. And like you said, they're having, like, Matthew Stafford's got decent statistics, completing nearly 73% of his passes for 512 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's great. He's thrown 5 interceptions. Like, I don't think people realize how many interceptions that is in 2 games.
He led the NFL in interceptions last year. He leads the NFL in the interceptions right now. He was sacked 7 times in week 1. Now, protection was better against Atlanta, but also Atlanta not particularly known for being a good defensive team.
Right. And, when you look at Atlanta on the season, Grady Jarrett's still a good player, but it's not like they're teaming with pass rush talent. I liked Arnold Ebiketie coming out, but he's a rookie, right? Like, he's not a guy that you're going to be banking your pass rushing on. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it'll be interesting to watch because I do think that the Rams are still the team to beat in the NFC West.
Absolutely. That's completely fair to say that.
Yeah, I think it's until they are conquered, I feel like it's, I don't want to say disrespectful, but like
they're the Super Bowl champions.
Right. I'm of the opinion, you got to beat the man to be the man, and that's what it comes with. And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's going to be tough. The Cardinals have to shore up their defense. Like, they're giving up the most points in the NFL right now, 33.5. Obviously, like Jess said, 44 of those came in 1 game. 23 points. If they can hold teams to 23 points, they're going to be able to compete. That's not a bad thing. 23 points is about where it needs to be, but they have to do more in terms of the total yards, in terms of creating turnovers. Their offense, go ahead.
They've got to get the Cardinals defense. They've got to get more pressure. Now, I will say this: they have gotten around the quarterback. They've got some hits. They've got some pressures, but 1 sack in 2 games, not really going to cut it.
No, and we talked about it. Zach Allen and Marcus Golden have 4 and 3 quarterback hits respectively, so that's not bad. But after that, it's like 1 each, and it can't be relying on JJ Watt to be the only guy that creates the pressures and the sacks. And so that is going to be something that has to improve. Their passes defense, Marco Wilson has 2. The next guy is JJ Watt with 1, right? Like, a defensive end who's played 63% of the snaps has as many passes defense as Jalen Thompson and and Jace Whitaker and Buda Baker and Byron Murphy and all these other guys. And so they need to get their hands on the football a little more. It's something that has to happen, because as much as we can complain about the Cardinals offense needing to say or create momentum and things like that, their defense has to at some point do something to do that. Now they did obviously the walk-off was fantastic, but in the same sense, they can't wait till the end of the game, right? Like, obviously if it happens at the end of the game and it wins the game, it's an optimal situation, but you can't wait till the end of the game to cause the one and only turnover of the game. Think about that. Honestly, think about that. There's 4 minutes left in overtime. So we had played 66 minutes of football before they forced their first turnover of the game. And by the way, their first sack of the game was the second play of the game. So like the two, and again, their defense played very well in the second half, but they have to, much like the offense needs to hit some big plays or have that spark, the defense needs to provide something as well. And they just haven't thus far. And so that's going to matter. I mean, it really is. And I can't stress it enough. You can't rely on your offense to score every time it's on the field, especially if you're not creating better opportunities for them to score.
Exactly. And then offensively, they're going to have to be they have to take care of the football. So it's kind of cliche. They've got to protect Kyler and they've got to protect the football, because this defense, even though they've given up points, will take the ball away. And I don't think the Cardinals are going to be like the Bills, turn the ball over 4 times and still win the game.
No, they're just not that good, and it's unfortunate. I mean, the Bills
they're crazy.
They're crazy good. Like, they and the Chiefs are head and shoulders right now above everybody else in the NFL, literally everybody else. And so in that sense, you can't play the same type of game. But if they play similar to how they played in the second half and overtime, they will have a chance to win the game. And that, to me, is what, again, going back to an earlier question, that to me will be what defines if they're a good team or not. If they have a chance to win the game late,
And that's kind of the thing. I'm going to say that they're going to ride their performance from the second half and get more of that from the start of the game, and hopefully not fall behind 14-0 after 2 drives. That's one thing. That's also something they can't go down 2 scores, especially against the Rams. But I think this will be a hotly contested game. I think I'm hoping it'll be everything that we want it to be when it ends with the Cardinals win. But I want to believe that was a springboard last week, and that they lock into practice, they execute offensively and defensively this next week. I think, if the Cardinals can play towards their ceiling, they can do what they did to the Rams on the road last year. But I also think that the Rams are not playing as well as they want to be, and so are also going to come out, especially at a place that they feel very comfortable playing and winning in. I think it'll come down to the wire. And I hope it's not a scenario where one team had to furiously come back and then fall short, that rather it's been kind of a back and forth affair.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by more than anything, is that they're in a position to compete late in the game. That's really what I mean. Obviously, if they mount a furious comeback and then fall short, and aren't able to get a stop late or something like that's going to be disappointing, because you want to see that there's improvement. And we haven't. The one criticism we can take from game 1 and 2 is that they've started extremely slowly, and they're putting themselves in a position where they have to play nearly flawless football or get a Herculean effort from a number of players to win a game. And that's just not realistic week to week. So why not just have a great performance over the whole game instead of an otherworldly performance for, the last 25 minutes of a game.
If the Cardinals are able to pull off this win, who are your predictors? Who will have been big in that game? Who on offense will be kind of the difference maker, and who on defense is the difference maker in a win?
I mean, obviously it's Kyler Murray on offense. So like if you go somewhere else, it will be Marquise Hollywood Brown putting up a big game, and they're continuing to be able to get something out of their running game. I thought when James left the game that we didn't even talk about Eno and Darryl stepping up and producing really nice, really solid, not great by any means, but solid performance.
And that's exactly, it's like kind of that's the Darryl Williams experience, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly the type of player he is. Like maybe he's not a start.
Yeah, we all thought they were crazy for keeping 5 running backs, and now 3 games into the season, we're like, God, Cliff saw the forest for the trees, right?
To see, Williams is the perfect guy, and it looks like that's how his usage is that. So Darryl Williams, we'll work him in a little bit. He'll play some special teams, but basically he is intended to be James Conner when James Conner needs a breather, and Benjamin is Chase Edmonds. And it's basically the role that they're playing.
Right. And so, so it'll be obviously, you can point to everybody, but I think Hollywood having a big game and the running backs being able to continue to run the ball consistently on offense will be the key. And then defensively, I think it's going to be Byron Murphy. Yes. and the pass rush again. Murphy had probably his best game as a pro against Devontae Adams, and now he just gets Cooper Kupp now. So
and Cooper Kupp he's got 12 catches. He's got the production he is having right now is insane. We'll say the Cardinals did hold Kupp to a very modest amount of production last year in his record-setting season year in the win that they had, but yeah, if they can keep Kupp down to the 7 catch, 80-yard range, I think you look at that and say, okay, that's kind of like what you want to do. You don't want the 10 to 15 for 130. Those are a lot of yards. If you can get it to 8 for 70 or 7 for 80, then you're like, okay, this is what we want to do. This is how we want to slow this team. But yeah, I'm going to say, I think, and I wrote this for my Sports Weekly preview for this game that we do for USA Today, and I think I have the Cardinals eking a 27-24 win this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know if they win this game, but I do think it's a close one, and I'll say like it's going to be like 28-24. I don't know which way it goes, but it's going to be a close one. And I think we see the momentum continue to carry over. But like I said, the Rams are still a very good team. So it's not, if they lose this game, but they're competitive, it's not a bad thing. It's just, they're just not quite all the way there yet.
Exactly. And with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. The best of Cardinals talking about this is episode 373. We, of course, as we are now in season, without a doubt, we will be back next week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening. As always, we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!